Filcher is a 2021 first-person stealth/immersive sim developed by Johan Hjarpe. It's a single-dev project that draws inspiration from the original Thief trilogy, particularly the first two entries, Thief the Dark Project and Thief the Metal Age. While there are some Thief-adjacent games out there, I don't think there exists a game that tries to emulate the Thief experience to the extent that Filcher does. And for the most part, it does a great job of paying homage to those games and carving a place of its own in the stealth scene. Filcher is close enough to its sources of inspiration to make Thief veterans feel right at home playing it, and also relatively accessible to players who haven't touched those games. I enjoyed my time with Filcher quite a lot, and I'm so excited to talk about this hidden gem today. So let's just cut to the chase and see what Filcher is about. Before we start, I have a Twitter with tweets and a Patreon where you can support the channel with real life money. Let's go. Filcher takes place in the city of Malmberg, a dark, corrupt, crime-ridden, neo-noir, retro-futuristic Art Deco metropolis that's parts 1920s Chicago, New York City and London, and parts Batman the Animated Series. You play as Spory, a stylish master thief who was trained under a criminal organization until deciding to strike out on her own as a freelance thief. All her targets come from the city's wealthy elite: business people, politicians, corporate executives, and even mob bosses. If you have anything of value, be it a safe filled with dirty street money, compromising documents proving your involvement in illicit activities, or a shiny trinket surrounded by state-of-the-art laser fields, Spory will pay you a visit. It's a question of when, not if. Now, similar to Garrett, who also had a knack for a non-consensual wealth redistribution, Spory is no Robin Hood. She's less steal from the rich and give to the poor, and more steal from the rich and reach out to Mickey Defense, who may or may not know a wealthy surgeon who doubles as a mob doctor and collects expensive art. The story is, as you can see, pretty simple and straightforward. The game tells you exactly what you need to know about Spory's personality and motives. Spory's background as a street urchin turned master thief shaped her cynical outlook on the world and self-serving nature. She's not malicious or anything like that, it's just that stealing is everything she's ever known, so she naturally takes pride in her craft. As for her motives, well, they basically boil down to stealing shit from the rich and living the high life until the next job. I vibe so hard with that. That's not to say the game is light on story and world building, it's just that Filcher takes a more quality over quantity show don't tell approach. The mission briefs detail the location, target, scope, motive, and goal of the heist, and then the environments fill in the narrative blanks, so to speak. Of course, there's tons of reading material spread throughout the levels and the occasional ambient conversations. Speaking of which, let's talk about the presentation. The first thing that stands out about Filcher is the way it's presented. Filcher is an aggressively film noir inspired game, and I mean, of course it is. It's a stealth game, with its stark lighting effects, deep, ominous shadows, cynical anti-hero protagonists, a feeling of disillusionment with the ruling class, and a general moodiness. There's no better aesthetic for a stealth game than film noir. Film noir protagonists are shrewd, street-smart nonconformists who face insurmountable odds, constantly outgunned, outnumbered, and outsmarted by shadowy forces who had rigged the game in their favor from the start. Sound familiar? I know I'm not saying anything new here, but I just wanted to reinforce how good a noir game Filcher is. In terms of pure visuals, Filcher has a late 90s, early 2000s aesthetic, paying obvious homage to the games that inspired it. And while Filcher is a games game at its core, and that the gameplay is the main focus, that doesn't mean it lacks style. One thing I love about the first two Thief games is how the little flourishes stand out against the utilitarian environments. Or a better way to put it is that the utilitarian nature of Thief spaces make the flourishes stand out that much more. Filcher is very similar to Thief in that regard. It will often surprise you with these micro mood pieces ripped straight out of an Edward Hopper painting. And since the game consists of tons of downtime where you'll be studying guard patrol routes in the shadows, there are plenty of opportunities to find and truly appreciate these details. Like a creepy hallway with a flickering light, This dark corner office baked in the gentle light cast by the window overlooking the city, this fridge briefly illuminating the kitchen when opened, shadows of spinning fans, this grunt silhouette guarding the back entrance of a jazz club you're supposed to infiltrate, even something as mundane as flicking a light switch will make you go, hell yeah. Filcher oozes style, and I love how it plays with light and shadows to convey a sense of dread, of impeding danger and mystique, of skulking around the city's seedy underbelly like a rat who caught the whiff of cheese in a cage filled with wolves. Sorry, I'm going through a Max Payne phase. I just turned 31. Like, today, as I'm recording this. I'm 31 years old. Now, that being said, you might be wondering what the hell is up with the character models. Unlike Thief and the games that inspired it, the characters and objects are 2D sprites. I'm not sure whether this was an intentional artistic decision or a pragmatic one. This is a solo dev project after all, but what I can say for sure is that it works. It fits the game's mood and aesthetic like a glove. It makes even the most basic goons look creepy and the guard dogs absolutely terrifying, on account of how unnatural the characters move. On that same note, objects are displayed in 2D, and despite that they feel very tangible in a way that only mundane objects in immersive sims feel, if that makes any sense. In terms of art direction, Filcher goes for a minimalistic art deco-ish style very similar to Batman the Animated Series. There's this one particular vista to the city skyline from the beginning of the very first mission that reminded me of that show. Just look at this shit, it's fucking beautiful. Also worth mentioning are the indoor areas. They're not exactly eye candy, in fact they're as aggressively functional as they can be, but they're brimming with personality and style. Let's look at some examples. The first mission takes place in a palatial penthouse located in Upper Pensbrook, a bougie old money enclave standing in for the Upper West Side, I think. The penthouse is equal parts domestic and gamey, in that it doesn't entirely make sense as a space where actual people live, but it's an awesome location nonetheless. I love this long shadowy hallway, the disgusting bedroom slash bar slash living room hybrid, the checkered marble floor, the kitschy nouveau riche statuettes dotting the penthouse's multiple rooms. Plus, let's be frank, the mission as a whole is a not so subtle nod to Lord Bafford's Manor, Thief the Dark Project's first mission, so it gets extra points for that. But the most visually unique level in my opinion is Club Misterioso, a jazz club located in the Westbrook district. Naturally, this is no regular club. It's a known hangout slash social club of the Brizelli crime family. Misterioso has all the hallmarks of a mob-controlled roaring 20s jazz club: a stage, a dining area, a bar, a VIP room, a dressing room for the performers, a casino area with roulette tables, a chill zone for the mobsters and the boss to do like goon shit, and also a basement for the mobsters to do unspeakable things to the people who owe them gambling debts. And then there's the backstage area. I call this the Lynchian demarcation zone. It's basically a checkered corridor flanked by red curtains. A bit creepy, but not like pants shitting creepy by itself. Maybe a bit surreal. It felt a bit like transitioning to the nightmarish part of Constantine's mansion in Thief the Dark Project. Until you realize you're walking on a marble floor, as are the guards behind the curtains. The sound of the footsteps is absolutely deafening and dread-inducing. I love this detail, such a clever mix of gameplay and art direction. Earlier I mentioned that Filcher's environments do most of the narrative heavy lifting. That's only partially true. Every couple of missions or so, Filcher uses these absolutely haunting graphic novel style cutscenes. The prose is sharp and concise, with the occasional hard-boiled flourish. There's no Max Payne level of intricate metaphors, like don't expect Spory to compare herself to a virus released into the city's circulatory system or anything like that, but the writing does its job alright. Spory is more of a pragmatist. She never struck me as the romantic type, and the writing reflects that. Spory is all about getting that bag. She's too busy redistributing wealth to philosophize about the nature and morality of her job or the systemic societal dysfunctions that forced her to pursue this line of work in the first place. There's one tiny problem though, the cutscenes are not voice acted. I ain't got a problem with that, but I felt like it was worth mentioning. And to be honest, I don't think it's a fair criticism in the first place since Filcher is a solo dev project and voice acting is fucking expensive. Fortunately, what Filcher lacks in voice talent to inject even more hard-boiled bravado in the cutscenes, it more than makes up for with incredible sound design. Let's have a listen. This applies to the levels too. Filcher creates these disgustingly oppressive soundscapes using a clever mixture of ambient and lo-fi doom jazz instrumentals. There's no groovy sax to be had here, rather subdued bass lines and ominous percussions. With the score, Filcher again reinforces this theme of being somewhere you shouldn't be. You feel the tension, the dread that you're one wrong turn or squeak of the floor away from ending up in a mafia graveyard. Let me put it another way, have you ever listened to Boren and their Club of Gore or the Dale Cooper Quartet? If you're familiar with these groups, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Like, for God's sake, Filcher has a song called Cthulhian Ambience even though the game has little to no supernatural, let alone cosmic horror elements. But I mean, it could have. Who says these 2D sprite goons are not fish people in disguise? Anyways, let's listen to some snippets. That said, let's talk gameplay because we have a lot of ground to cover here. So Filcher is a first-person 2D mission-based stealth game. You're dropped into a level with a predetermined set of tools, more on that later, and tasked with separating the mission's target and their goons from their precious trinkets while keeping as low a profile as possible. And when I say dropped into a level, I mean that in the most literal sense possible. Spory's model does that jiggle that Garrett does when he spawned into a level, as if a gigantic hand grabbed them by the collar and literally dropped them in the world, which is a very cute tribute to Thief. I love these unnecessarily specific references. They demonstrate an attention to detail that only somebody who really got what made the media they're building off of work would possess. Anyways, so what do you do in Filcher? How does the typical mission play out? Filcher is a pure stealth game. You can pick up bodies and throw them into a shadowy corner, you pick safes and doors, you fumble in the dark for money, shiny trinkets and keys to open specific doors, you bonk enemies in the head with your trusty blackjack, you rummage through notes and journals for codes and bits of lore and world building, you dodge security cameras, you pickpocket enemies, but there's more to Filcher than that. Let's circle back to Spory's Filcher tools. By the way, in case the game's thief pedigree wasn't obvious enough, the word Filcher is literally a synonym for thief. Anyways, the blackjack. The concept behind the blackjack is simple. It knocks enemies unconscious as long as they're not facing you. Frontal attacks are useless, so don't even try that. Then you got the flashlight, very useful for investigating shadowy corners for hidden loot and secret compartments. Yes, this game has tons of secrets. A keyring for, well, keys, a duck penguin thingy that makes noise and alerts enemies, moss spores that you can throw on the ground to slow down enemies and make surfaces quieter, flashbangs to stun enemies, a lockpick to pick open safes and doors, but not all safes and doors as some require special colored keys, and a dart gun. As you probably guessed from the name, this one shoots non-lethal knockout darts, but don't get too excited about the dart gun. For one, the dart gun has limited range, so you should always aim slightly above your target just as a precaution. Secondly, it shoots only one dart at a time and it takes its sweet time to reload, so forget about knocking out more than one guard at a time. Thirdly, you get only 4 knockout darts each mission, and the game really goes out of its way to make additional darts as hard to find as possible. Lastly, and most crucially, these darts must sting like a motherfucker because enemies will instantly know your location and chase after you until they fall unconscious. This counts as a detection and will affect your score and rating at the end of the mission. The way this works is that Spory gives herself a score and rank based on the amount of loot and secrets she finds, with additional points awarded if she can finish the job without alerting enemies, triggering alarms, taking damage, and hurting guards. The fact that Spory ranks herself like a professional dedicated to honing their craft is honestly a very nice touch. I like seeing this diegetic stuff in my video games. It makes me feel fuzzy on the inside. You might have noticed that Filcher features no lethal tools. In fact, short of dumping unconscious bodies in the water in one specific mission, there's no way to kill enemies, at least to my knowledge. So by taking away this get out of jail free card, you're forced to fully engage with the stealth mechanics. And there are plenty of stealth mechanics and little touches that will feel very familiar to Thief veterans. There's a visibility gem that indicates Spory's, well, visibility, noise levels that the character makes when walking on certain surfaces, 3 states of movement that create different noise levels, enemy patrol routes designed with several layers of redundancy and that intersect in unexpected ways, noisy enemies that growl so that players can gauge their location by sound alone, and so on. Granted, it takes a while to fully internalize Filcher's mechanics and figure out the advantages and limitations of each tool, but once that happens, you'll steadily uncover more and more ways to transform the environment to your advantage. For example, I figured out that moss spores not only dampen the sound you make when walking, they also slow down enemies. While you can outrun most guards, their walking speed is faster than your crouching speed, so catching up with them while crouched can be tricky. Ideally, you should target guards whose patrol routes just so happen to intersect with a dark corner from where you can get a jump on them, but you won't always have easy access to shadows, not to mention the fact that some guards carry flashlights. So I figured that I could just throw moss spores in doorways and at the base of staircases, slowing down guards and giving me just enough time to run out of cover and deliver a swift knockout blow without alerting them. You'll also learn pretty quickly not to rely on shadows as much. Every piece of furniture can be turned into cover. Here's me using a desk chair to avoid the Orwellian gaze of a security camera, and here's another instance of big-brained stealth evasion. And yes, crouching circles around the desk counts, I'll take no further questions. Now, while Filcher plays very close to the games that inspired it, there are some areas where it deliberately breaks away from the conventions established by Thief. First of all, there's no mantling mechanic. In fact, apart from a couple of very specific instances, the levels have little to no verticality. This is not so much a disadvantage image as it is an interesting design choice. Naturally, this means that the rope arrow, one of Thiev's most interesting and transformative tools, is entirely absent from Filcher. Secondly, Filcher's design relies heavily on the slide mechanic. Basically, if you're running, which is the standard movement state, and you hit crouch, your character slides silently across noisy surfaces, like metal grates. You can use this to close the distance between Spory and guards, but it obviously runs the risk of alerting them to her presence. It's a high-risk, high-reward tactic typically used by speedrunners to ghost levels. Personally, I found the slide mechanic a lot more useful when dealing with security cameras. For instance, in the first mission, there's a security camera positioned above a desk and to the right of a jewel box. Using this privacy screen or dividing wall or whatever the fuck it's called as a starting point, I waited for the camera to turn away from my location and sprang out of cover and hid underneath the desk. I then proceeded to pick the jewel box because, you know, the rent ain't gonna pay itself. And finally, the big trench-coated elephant in the room, the lack of checkpoints or any sort of save function. This is a big point of contention among fans and detractors. I sort of understand where they're coming from. Dying and having to start over from the beginning is frustrating. I totally get that, and people have a right to be upset about this. However, it didn't take me long to realize that 1, it was a deliberate design decision, and 2, the game would be lesser had it allowed players to save scum. The missions are balanced around the lack of checkpoints, both in terms of length and design. Take the time I died near the end of the first mission. I was seething. I nearly gave up on the game. However, thanks to the map knowledge I had gained, reaching that point took half as much time. On top of that, I even got to try new approaches to deal with enemies and discover rooms and secrets I had missed the first time around. Plus, it was 100% my fault. I triggered an alarm and instead of running to the exit, I just froze and allowed the guards to gun me down. In other words, I think Filcher is a great stealth game because of the lack of a save system, not in spite of it. The prospect of a complete restart makes you think twice about confronting a guard. It forces you to pay attention to your surroundings and strategize. The tension and excitement stem from just how underpowered Spory is compared to her enemies. There's no keyhole peeking mechanic, so every new room is a coin flip in terms of danger. There are plenty of brightly lit, heavily patrolled areas where Spory is completely exposed. Patrol routes that span multiple rooms and intersect with hiding spots. Security cameras guarding locked doors. Like, imagine picking a door, hands sweaty, heart pumping, hoping Spory is quick enough to pick the door before the camera turns its gaze to her. These stealth challenges, so to speak, are made all the more exciting by having this metaphorical sword hanging over your head. And that first time you complete a mission in one go, you have no idea how satisfying it feels. Now, Filcher does have a few issues that bugged me. For one, Filcher desperately needs a fence mechanic to sell loot and buy and improve equipment. Thief had a fence mechanic and even Dishonored 1's DLCs included one. I would have greatly appreciated the option to sell my hard-earned loot and buy different quantities of various equipment, with some restrictions of course. You could make it so that one could start the mission with a maximum amount of 6 darts and 5 moss spores or something like that, to prevent players from altering the balance too much. However, I totally understand why a fence wasn't included, as that would have required the balancing of levels around this mechanic, which I imagine is way too much work for a solo dev. Secondly, the auto-closing doors. Oh my god, they drove me fucking insane. Why can't doors stay open? Okay, well, maybe the dev discovered that having perpetually open doors fucks with the enemy pathfinding or something. I don't know, I'm sorry, it didn't bother me that much. Thirdly, actually, there's no thirdly. These are my two main gripes with the game, and they're pretty minor in the grand scheme of things. Filcher is just a very well put together game. Before we end the video, I'd like to talk about mission setups, design, and various random observations. Given Filcher's focus on gameplay, it has a quite decent variety of locations, setups, scenarios, and objectives. Each location has its own personality, theme, and backstory. You can immerse yourself into the backstory of these locations by reading notes and journals left behind by the people who live and work there. While you never meet these characters in person and you get only snippets of their backstories, these people actually feel real because their personalities shine through the writing alone. My favorite example is this note by a jeweler who, in a noble attempt to alleviate his paranoia about burglars, proceeded to write down in comical detail a step-by-step tutorial on how to access the most valuable item in his collection, complete with information about the secret passageway in his study and where to find security codes. It's It's almost as if he is daring you to try. Another, I guess you could call it world-building detail that I liked was the nature of the crime syndicate Spory trained under. See, it's not a mere street gang, it's a full-blown thief academy that, along with training, provides food, housing and education to its students. The Blackburn House, which serves as the headquarters of the syndicate, sports a huge library and a literal classroom. Students, yes, you heard me right, students recruited directly from the mean streets of Malmberg are taught how to read, write, basic math before advancing to more complex subjects like literature, political sciences, philosophy, art, and so on. These motherfuckers probably have a better grasp of the arts than the so-called high society types that look down on them. And it makes sense if clean, non-violent heists are the bread and butter of your organization. You want a pool of intelligent, well-educated, fiercely loyal master thieves capable of blending in with high society. You need recruits who can hold their own in a verbal sparring contest with a moneyed socialite at some fancy soiree or whatever. You want someone who can study the layout of a building and come up with 500 contingency plans when shit will inevitably hit the fan. I am absolutely amazed at this level of detail and world building. Love seeing this shit in games. Now, as for the missions themselves, there are a few standouts that I want to briefly take stock of. There's Winslow and Sons Insurance, a corporate espionage themed mission where the loot goal consists of documents as opposed to cash money and shiny trinkets. There's the Tearstone Diamonds, a very tense, complex, multi-step infiltration job that involves breaking into the apartment above the jewel trader to unlock the vault and disable the security systems protecting the fat uncut gems Spory is supposed to steal. Once you deal with the security systems, you have 70 seconds to reach the vault before they're reactivated. I also loved Swordfish, a mission that has Spory worming her way into a mob-controlled restaurant by the docks. There's an inaccessible lighthouse that's constantly revolving and shining a light both on the docks area and in the restaurant itself. There's tough customers, a short player character temporarily loses access to their equipment type of mission where the mafia gets the drop on Spory and barges into her hideout. It's the only time we see the Master Thief in a truly vulnerable position. Small tangent, this is not just a place for Spory to sleep and recuperate between missions. It's actually a dive bar that serves as a front for Spory's illicit activities as well as a money laundering scheme. A small detail that I liked, this hole in the wall offering a bird's eye view of the entire bar. Also, the atmosphere in this bar fucks. And that's pretty much it for this video. Filcher is a clever, very well put together game that's sure to satisfy both veterans of the stealth genre and newcomers. It's dark, tense, moody, atmospheric, surprisingly funny for a game with such strong film noir influences, and mechanically tight. The lack of a save function, as rightfully controversial as it is, adds an exciting dimension to a genre that's historically prone to save scumming, let's put it that way. Not that there's anything wrong with save scumming, you're obviously free to play games your way, I'm just saying. I'm always happy when stealth game developers try to address this issue of save scumming in a creative way. Anyways, I highly recommend picking up Filcher. It's super cheap, about €9 full price. Too bad this game had the misfortune of coming out on the same day as fucking Deathloop. I'm sure it would have made more waves had it been released in literally any other day. Oh well. Thanks for watching. As always, a huge thank you to my wonderful patrons whose generosity makes these videos possible. I'll see you next time.